Fred stayed on that side. So what happened is I hit the walkway. Fred takes Bandit. He stays right there. So every time
he does it, yeah.
So guys, this is. Do you guys really think? I mean, this is crazy.
So crazy.
I just can't wait till this shit's over with, dude. I really can't. I really, really, really cannot wait.
What are you going to talk about?
Did you get a good look at the car yesterday? Green like that. Okay? But this time I waited till it turned, and I had right now, okay? And right here, a car turned. I was about right here and clipped me. Sped up really fast.
New information has emerged in the Summer Wells case. An alleged message reading, "It was done." Reports that Summer was seen behind the truck, and the unexplained disappearance of Candus from the most critical segment of the timeline. When aligned with the email claiming Hunter, backed up and hit the little girl, and the discrepancies surrounding Summer's final outfit, these details form a sequence that has never been examined together. The overlap between these independent claims isolates a specific window of time and location where the key event could have occurred. This analysis focuses solely on that convergence and the factual contradictions that point directly to what may have happened to Summer Wells. According to Ziggy's own statements, the first event occurred at a familiar intersection she passed daily. She claimed that as she attempted to cross, a vehicle accelerated suddenly, closing distance unexpectedly. The phrasing she repeated across multiple retellings was the same. The vehicle gunned it, turned sharply toward her, and made physical contact as it passed. She said the impact pushed her to the side, not forcefully enough to cause a fall with injury, but enough that she felt her balance shift and saw what she described as tire marks on her clothing. These marks were referenced multiple times as supporting detail, though no photograph or physical documentation was presented publicly. The description of the vehicle was minimal. Ziggy did not give a plate number, a precise model, or even a distinctive color. Her only assertion was that the car was of a particular type, but she was unable to identify any unique feature that would allow independent confirmation. The second event, which she said happened the very next day at the same intersection, followed the same general pattern. She described approaching the crosswalk, seeing a vehicle approach the turn lane, and observing the same abrupt acceleration. She said the car made a similar turning movement, once again close enough to make contact. Her wording suggested the same style of low-impact bump, a push, a nudge, something that redirected her steps. Again, she claimed tire marks, and again no visual evidence was produced. The critical element is that she said the vehicle resembled the one involved in the first incident so closely that she believed it was the same car. She did not identify a driver, nor did she report noticing any unique traits that would verify that the same vehicle returned 24 hours later. The similarity between the two alleged events forms the core structure of her narrative. In both accounts, the location was the same, the movement pattern of the car was the same, the impact description was the same, and the absence of detail was the same. She repeated that the vehicle accelerated sharply, that it took a sudden turn into her path, and that contact occurred at nearly the same angle. She framed both incidents as near identical occurrences, using duplicated phrasing and maintaining the same timeline context, 2 consecutive days, roughly the same time of day, and the same pedestrian routine. This internal consistency is notable, but it is also the first point at which verification becomes impossible. Without witnesses or cameras, the narrative has no independent anchor. One of the few objective points available is her live stream immediately after each incident. Ziggy recorded herself at the intersection, showing the general area and describing what had just happened. The live streams confirm her presence and confirm that she represented the event as occurring minutes earlier. What they do not show is the vehicle itself. No car resembling the one she described appears on camera, and no collision or attempted collision is captured. The footage shows her standing near the crosswalk, pointing to traffic lanes and explaining her movement path. These recordings serve as timestamps, but not as proof of impact. Another structural element in her account is the repeated statement that the same type of car was involved both times, without a plate, a driver description, or a defining feature. This conclusion relies entirely on perceived similarity. Her description suggests a generic classification rather than a specific identification. Because of this, the claim of repetition cannot be evaluated using external markers. It can only be compared to her own verbal consistency, which remains stable across the different recountings. An additional factor relevant to the event mechanics comes from observations made by PJ and Dolly about the physical environment. They noted that the intersection shown in her video includes a standard pedestrian walk button, and in her own recording she did not appear to use it. This is important strictly from a movement logic perspective. If the button was not pressed, the pedestrian signal would not activate, and vehicle right-of-way patterns would remain unaltered. This could place a pedestrian in a hazardous crossing position, creating a situation in which a car turning at normal speed could appear to approach too quickly. This detail does not confirm or negate her account, but directly affects the plausibility of the described movement patterns. There is also the issue of external verification. Ziggy stated she attempted to locate surveillance footage by contacting nearby businesses. According to her, no one had usable footage. She did not list which businesses she spoke to, nor did any owner or employee come forward publicly to confirm the inquiry. No driver has been identified, no witness reported seeing her struck, and no passerby corroborated the presence of a vehicle turning aggressively. The lack of outside confirmation applies to both days and both alleged impacts. The probability of two unobserved pedestrian impacts in the same location on consecutive days is not impossible, but it rests entirely on her testimony without supporting evidence. A review of her descriptions shows that the geometry of the intersection itself does align with scenarios where vehicles turning right or left could pass near a pedestrian who steps into the crosswalk without an active signal. The layout includes multiple lanes and a corner that allows for fast turning movements. This means that close passes between cars and pedestrians are structurally plausible. However, plausibility does not confirm occurrence. It only establishes that nothing in the physical setting contradicts her account. The logical assessment of the two events, limited strictly to the physical claims, reveals a narrative defined by internal repetition, but external absence. Two similar impacts, at the same location, under the same conditions, alleged by a single witness with no corroboration, produce an account that can be documented only as a self-consistent description without independent support. The live streams provide time and place but not proof of impact. The vehicle remains unidentified. The driver remains unknown. No physical evidence was preserved. The intersection layout matches her description of movement patterns, but that is the only verifiable component. The 911 call connected to this incident begins with a detail that immediately separates it from conventional collision reporting. Ziggy did not contact law enforcement at the time of the alleged impact. Instead, she stated it happened earlier today, placing several unaccounted hours between the event and the moment she reached emergency services. In documented traffic incidents, the reporting window is typically narrow because evidence, vehicle position, physical marks, witness presence, changes rapidly. Here, the delay eliminates the possibility of immediate verification. No skid marks could be checked, no vehicle could be stopped in transit, and no witnesses could be interviewed while the memory was fresh. This time gap is the first critical structural issue in the call. When the dispatcher answered, Ziggy asked to file a non-emergency report. This classification is notable because a vehicle striking a pedestrian, regardless of severity, is treated as a priority incident in most jurisdictions. Ziggy did not describe injuries, did not request EMS, and did not indicate she needed immediate patrol response. She framed the event as something to document rather than an active hazard. The request placed the report into a low-urgency category before any facts were recorded, shaping the way the dispatcher approached the call. As she explained her reason for calling, Ziggy began by introducing herself as a true crime YouTuber. This identity statement appeared before she described the event, implying relevance to her report. In the absence of factual detail at this stage, the dispatcher's understanding of the situation was shaped first by profession and only afterwards by the description of the incident. This sequencing is atypical. In verified incident calls, callers usually begin by describing what happened, where it occurred, and whether anyone is injured. Here, the order was reversed. The first concrete claim about the event came only after Ziggy established her role. She then stated, "I was hit earlier," presenting the collision as a closed event rather than an ongoing emergency. After hearing the phrase, "I was hit," the dispatcher initiated standard motor vehicle collision protocol. This involves questions about the car's type, license plate, direction of travel, and whether the driver left the scene. In response, Ziggy did not provide identifying information. She did not know the plate. She did not specify a model. She did not mention a driver description or any distinguishing marks. Instead, she focused on her belief that the incident was intentional, repeating the statement, "I think someone is trying to hit me." Without concrete identifiers, the dispatcher could not categorize the event as a hit and run, a reckless driving case, or an intentional assault. The lack of usable detail restricted the report to narrative form, rather than actionable documentation. A second structural issue arises from the sequence of activity just before the call. Ziggy spoke at length about the alleged impact during a live stream. The broadcast served as her initial account of the incident. Only after explaining it on video did she contact emergency services. This sequence matters in investigation because it reverses the typical order. In standard collision cases, the official report precedes any public recounting, ensuring that factual details are not influenced by later reinterpretation. Here, the narrative was publicly shaped before law enforcement was involved. Her live stream also shows that she rehearsed specific phrases, "I was hit earlier," and "I think someone is trying to hit me," before presenting them to the dispatcher. This rehearsed structure introduces a second layer of interpretation between the event and its formal reporting. Further review reveals that Ziggy's description to the dispatcher lacked key structural components normally present in vehicle impact calls. She did not describe the speed of the vehicle, the angle of contact, or the direction it went after the alleged hit. She did not specify which lane it came from or which direction she was walking. Without these elements, the dispatcher had no means to determine whether the event occurred at the crosswalk, the curb, or the road shoulder. The description was framed entirely through interpretation rather than observation. The dispatcher attempted to clarify, but Ziggy returned repeatedly to the idea that the driver might be targeting her. This created a mismatch between the expected factual structure of a collision report and the interpretive structure she provided. A third inconsistency involves the timing of the alleged second impact. Ziggy indicated that the incidents occurred on 2 consecutive days. However, the call did not include timestamps for either event. The dispatcher was given no approximate hour, no description of traffic conditions, and no information on whether the area was populated at the time. In verified cases, time of day is critical because it determines whether nearby drivers, pedestrians, or businesses could have witnessed the event. Without timestamps, it became impossible for the dispatcher to link the report to any external corroboration. Another point of contradiction appears in the dispatcher's misunderstanding of the event type. Because Ziggy's initial phrasing implied a collision, the dispatcher treated it as a traffic matter. Only after repeated clarification attempts did the dispatcher understand that Ziggy was not describing a current emergency, a medical issue, or a situation requiring pursuit. This miscommunication demonstrates that the call lacked the foundational details necessary for classification. A report that cannot be categorized cannot be investigated. The call ends without escalation, investigation, or assignment. This outcome reflects the dispatcher's inability to extract actionable detail from Ziggy's narrative. Without a clear time, vehicle description, or evidence of injury, the report remained a verbal account with no corresponding field response. In a true crime context, the significance of this lies not in disproving or validating the alleged collision, but in highlighting how the structure of the call makes verification impossible. The chain of evidence never formed. The behavioral pattern surrounding Ziggy's actions during this period presents a sequence that can be examined through observable conduct alone. Across multiple live streams, she is seen pacing outside, repeatedly scanning the street, and narrating her movements in real time. The pacing itself is continuous and circular. She walks down the sidewalk, stops, turns, and retraces the same steps, often without a clear purpose other than to show her surroundings. The camera remains active throughout this movement, producing extended footage where the primary focus is her environment rather than a specific event. This repetition becomes a consistent feature across streams, indicating a level of sustained hypervigilance. Another recurring action is her habit of checking the windows. She frequently pulls back the curtains and directs the camera toward the exterior of her house, while explaining that someone might be watching or photographing her home. These statements have no independent verification. No footage shows an individual taking photos, and no external witnesses have confirmed seeing anyone outside her residence. Nevertheless, Ziggy narrates these moments with certainty, stating that she believes someone was at the window or across the street observing her. On several streams, she pauses mid-sentence to recheck the blinds, as if expecting movement. Her belief that she is being followed extends across multiple days. She mentions different individuals, drivers, pedestrians, or figures she cannot identify, that she claims have been near her property more often than normal. Each mention is presented as part of a larger pattern she perceives, though no external data connects the appearances of these individuals. She provides no descriptions, timestamps, or repeat sightings of the same person. Most of the references involve vague figures such as a guy outside or someone across the street. Despite this, she frames these encounters as coordinated or intentional. The lack of verifiable identifiers makes it impossible to evaluate the claims beyond acknowledging that she interpreted the presence of strangers as significant. Sleep disruption is another documented behavior. Ziggy mentions repeatedly that she has not slept or has slept very little. This aligns with the visible timestamps on her streams, which show activity at irregular hours and filming sessions late at night or extremely early in the morning. The accumulation of live streams across a short period reinforces this pattern. She broadcasts long after midnight, then appears again on camera only a few hours later. These extended hours produce a continuous stream of narration in which she moves from window checks to pacing to recounting perceived threats. During their commentary, Dolly and PJ observed that Ziggy was exhibiting what they described as full Britney Spears mode, a shorthand phrase they used to summarize the sudden shift into erratic, highly reactive behavior. Their remark is not a clinical assessment, but an observation about the intensity and unpredictability of her actions on camera. They highlighted moments where Ziggy appeared agitated, distracted, or sharply switching between topics, suggesting that her behavior differed noticeably from her typical live stream demeanor. These observations were based on visible actions, abrupt pacing, rapid speech, and continuous scanning of the environment. Callers who watched her streams also remarked that Ziggy might need mental health support. Their comments were responses to her on-camera conduct, rather than diagnoses. The concern came from her repeated claims of being watched, followed, photographed, or targeted, none of which were supported by evidence shown on those same streams. Viewers noted that the frequency of these declarations increased over time. In one session, she stated multiple times within minutes that someone was outside. In another, she said she believed people were tracking her movements. The caller's reactions represent an external perception of escalating behavior, driven only by what they observed through her broadcasts. A significant behavioral component involves her merging of personal identity with perceived surveillance. Ziggy stated more than once that she believed people were following her because she was working a case. This statement links her daily activities to an external threat she perceives but does not substantiate. Her behavior also includes extended, uninterrupted filming sessions, 20 minutes or more of walking the same stretch of pavement, turning the camera toward passing cars, or recording silence while she listens for sounds outside her home. In several streams, She holds the camera outward while walking, only to abruptly swing it back toward herself when she thinks she heard something. These moments reveal a pattern of scanning and rescanning, checking and rechecking, as if verifying the absence or presence of something she cannot define precisely. The footage does not capture anything resembling a threat, but it captures her search for one. This repetition appears to serve a functional purpose in her mind: confirmation. She narrates her actions while performing them, describing what she sees even when nothing identifiable is visible on camera. She labels ordinary traffic, distant figures, and ambient noise as potential indicators of surveillance. The behavior, when reviewed as a sequence, shows a consistent loop: detection, interpretation, filming, explanation, and return to detection. This cycle occupies most of her on-camera time during this period. From an investigative perspective, these behaviors are understood not by speculating about her mental state, but by evaluating the conditions in which they occur. Ziggy was broadcasting to a community already saturated with speculation, tension, and rumor. She was receiving constant feedback, both supportive and critical, while simultaneously trying to interpret events she believed were connected. The cumulative effect of these behaviors is a progressive narrowing of focus. She concentrates on single details: a car passing, a shadow near a window, a noise outside, and immediately links them to a larger perceived threat. Her routines during this period reflect sustained stress and heightened vigilance without corroborating evidence. These actions, taken together, indicate a pattern shaped by pressure and community dynamics, in which misinterpretation of normal events becomes increasingly likely. In the fragmented network of names, repeatedly referenced in community discussions, Andy B occupies a position that appears disproportionate to the amount of verified information available about him. His presence in conversation stems almost entirely from secondary statements, caller accounts, and interpretations offered by creators analyzing the Summer Wells case. Despite the lack of official documentation from TBI or any law enforcement agency, Andy B's name recurs with unusual frequency, forming a consistent point of reference in numerous community narratives. One of the first mentions comes from a statement attributed to Chris McDonough, who, according to callers, suggested that Andy B had supplied banned substances to Candus. This statement, repeated across livestream discussions, became a cornerstone of the narrative surrounding his involvement. It was never corroborated by TBI, never supported by records, and never affirmed through formal interviews. Yet the claim entered the rumor chain early and remained embedded in community discourse. Its persistence demonstrates how a single unverified statement can become a structural element in public interpretation of a case, especially when the individuals involved already had known associations with substance use. Further contributions to this narrative come from callers who said Candus purchased from him. Again, these are unverified claims, with no receipts, messages, or formal testimony linking the two directly. The pattern in these statements is consistent. Each caller presents the information as something everyone knows, but none provide a source beyond word of mouth. This type of rumor propagation is common in unsolved cases involving isolated rural communities where social networks overlap. Andy B's name spreads not because of evidence, but because the environment allows informal accounts to fill the gaps left by limited official updates. Andy B's presence also appears in relation to messages exchanged with Candus, though the content and context of those messages are not examined here. His inclusion in those communications, indirectly referenced through hearsay, reinforces the perception that he was connected to her social sphere. Without the messages themselves, the significance of his appearance cannot be assessed. However, within the community narrative, any communication between him and Candus quickly became a point of speculation, magnifying his perceived involvement. The absence of verification ironically amplified interest in his name, as contradictions and gaps tend to create fertile ground for speculation in true crime contexts. Callers frequently expanded Andy B's role by situating him within the broader community network. They referenced his connections to people who lived near Ben Hill Road, individuals with criminal backgrounds, and others involved in banned substances activity in the region. None of these associations were confirmed through law enforcement disclosures. The statements are based solely on the interpersonal knowledge of locals, which lacks the reliability required for investigative conclusions. However, repeated mentions of Andy B's proximity, both socially and geographically, to individuals connected to the Wells household contributed to the perception that he served as a central figure within an informal network of high-risk activity. Geographically, callers suggested that Andy B lived close enough to the area to intersect with the daily movements of the Wells family. His supposed location was referenced as being within a short drive of Ben Hill Road, though no precise address or documented evidence of his residence was provided. In investigative terms, this suggests only that he was not excluded from the general region. Many individuals in the area share similar proximity. Without specific movement data, his location cannot be tied to any timeline. Nonetheless, the geographic ambiguity surrounding him allowed his name to remain plausible to followers of the narrative, since no definitive information could eliminate him from consideration. The relationship triangle often referenced, Andy B, Candus, and Dawn, exists solely within the rumor sphere. Callers claimed that both Candus and Dawn had interacted with him at different times for substance-related reasons. These claims were built on community impressions rather than documented interactions. No official interview logs, arrest records, or witness statements support these connections. They are important to document because they influence public perception, but they cannot be used to draw conclusions about involvement in the underlying case. Despite the lack of official information, Andy B's name became a recurring touchpoint in online discussions. The frequency with which he appears is itself notable. In cases where authorities release limited information, the public often gravitates toward names that appear repeatedly, regardless of whether the repetition is grounded in evidence. Andy B became such a name, functioning as a node through which callers attempted to make sense of scattered events, conflicting timelines, and unverified accounts. His position within the rumor network reflects the community's attempt to connect individuals through patterns that may or may not exist. The absence of any formal statement from TBI about Andy B is the most important factual data point. None of the agency's public updates referenced him. No warrants, searches, or interviews were publicly tied to his name. The contrast between his prominence in rumor discussions and his complete absence in verified documentation underscores the distinction between community speculation and law enforcement priorities. In investigative contexts, this contrast functions as an indicator that a figure may be relevant only within the unofficial narrative, not within the actual evidentiary landscape. Taken together, the information surrounding Andy B reveals a structure built entirely from unconfirmed community accounts, repeated statements, and overlapping assumptions. Each link connecting him to Candus or Dawn remains speculative. Each reference to his location or involvement relies on secondhand commentary rather than direct evidence. His role exists primarily as a repeated name within the rumor chain, not as a documented participant in any known event. Among the unverified statements circulating around the case, one stands out for its potential implications and its persistent presence across 3 years of community discussion. The claim that Hunter read a message from Candus to Andy that said, "It was done." This message, if it existed, would represent one of the most consequential fragments connected to the timeline of Summer Wells' disappearance. Unlike other rumors that rely on interpretation or ambiguous behavior, this fragment allegedly contains direct language indicating completion of an action. Its specificity is what elevates its risk profile within true crime analysis. The origin of the claim traces back to Hunter's own statements, recorded informally and repeated through various discussions. According to those accounts, Hunter said Candus received a message from Andy, or sent one to him, containing the phrase in question. No screenshot was ever produced, no digital record was captured, and the phone containing the alleged message was not provided for independent verification. For that reason, the message exists solely in hearsay form. Despite this limitation, it became a central point in several analyses, including segments discussed by Chris McDonough, who referenced the claim during a recap of the early interviews. His repetition of the message did not authenticate it, but validated that the claim had reached individuals with investigative backgrounds, further solidifying its place in public discourse. Dolly and PJ, reviewing the narrative months later, questioned whether Hunter had been truthful. Their debate centered not on the meaning of the phrase, but on whether Hunter had a motive to fabricate or misinterpret it. They noted that Hunter was a teenager at the time, under pressure, and influenced by multiple adults with competing narratives. They also pointed out the absence of physical evidence. Their analysis did not dismiss the message outright. Instead, it highlighted the structural weakness created by relying solely on Hunter's recollection. In the absence of a preserved device or verified timestamps, the message cannot be classified as evidence. It remains an unconfirmed statement attributed to an unreliable chain of custody. Despite the absence of documentation, the phrase, "It was done," carries unusual weight because of its structure. In linguistic analysis, such phrasing indicates finality. It implies that an agreed-upon task, action, or step has been completed. The passive construction, "was done," suggests the speaker and recipient already understood the subject of the verb. In other words, the message would not have clarified what referred to because both parties already knew. Applied within the context of a missing child case, this structure becomes concerning. If the message were authentic, it would suggest pre-existing coordination between Candus and Andy regarding an unspecified action that reached completion shortly before, during, or after the time Summer was last seen. One of the most unanswered questions is why this claim was not pursued or clarified within the first weeks of the investigation. For 3 years, the message remained outside official documentation, mentioned only in live streams, recap shows, and discussions among creators. The lack of follow-up is partly attributable to the absence of a device containing the message and partly due to the instability of early witness accounts. Once a claim enters a rumor chain without supporting evidence, investigators may deprioritize it in the absence of corroboration. However, its omission from the public investigative narrative does not diminish its potential relevance if the message were ever authenticated. The community's belief in the message's authenticity can be traced to 2 factors: repetition and context. First, the message was repeated by multiple individuals, even if they were all downstream from the same source. In true crime rumor propagation, repeated statements often gain perceived legitimacy simply because they are echoed. Second, the timing described by Hunter placed the alleged message within a narrow window of the day, close to the period during which Summer was last seen. Whether or not this timing is accurate, its proximity to critical events increases the perceived significance. The risk posed by a message like, "It was done," lies not only in what it says but in what it omits. It does not specify an action, a location, or an outcome. Its lack of detail is exactly what gives it narrative power. In an investigation where timeline conflicts and unclear movements dominate the early hours, a message indicating a completed action, sent between individuals already connected through rumors of substance exchange, introduces the possibility of coordination that cannot be disregarded outright. Without independently verified content, the message cannot be classified as evidence, but the language itself remains incompatible with benign interpretation when examined under investigative lenses. Linking the phrase to the day of Summer's disappearance requires care. Hunter's statements place the message within a sequence of interactions between him and Candus earlier in the day. While the precise timing is unclear, the narrative situates the message within the same general period in which several inconsistencies in behavior and movement were reported. This temporal adjacency is one reason the message persists as one of the most discussed fragments in the case. Even without direct forensic corroboration, its reported position within the timeline aligns with the hours during which the verifiable chain of events begins to fracture. The message has therefore become a smoking gun rumor, a phrase used by multiple community members to describe information that could theoretically break open the case if authenticated. The label reflects the community's recognition of its potential impact, not its evidentiary status. In reality, the message remains a high-risk but unverified fragment. It represents the type of claim that, if true, would fundamentally alter the interpretation of the timeline, but if false, illustrates how powerful and disruptive hearsay can be in an unsolved case. Among the unverified narratives surrounding the disappearance of Summer Wells, the vehicle-involved theory occupies a distinctive position because it originates from multiple unrelated sources. Although none of the claims are supported by physical evidence, they share structural similarities that make the pattern important to document. The earliest known origin point of this theory comes from an email sent by a woman in Arkansas who stated that Hunter had been tipsy, had backed up a vehicle, and had hit a young girl. She asked the recipient not to reveal her identity, describing her knowledge as secondhand. The information was forwarded to TBI, but was never publicly acknowledged or incorporated into any formal update. This tip remained dormant for months, resurfacing only when separate statements from other individuals aligned with its core claim. A caller later recounted a separate phrase attributed to Candus, that Summer had been behind the truck. The caller did not provide context, but the phrasing was precise enough to draw attention. The directive element, positioning Summer relative to a moving vehicle, matched the Arkansas tip in its essential components. Like the email, this account lacked corroboration. It did not come from a recorded interview or sworn statement, yet the language carried notable consistency. Dolly also referenced an older rumor that had circulated early in the case, that Summer was hit and moved. This rumor predated the Arkansas email and the caller's recounting of Candus's words, which suggests that the vehicle-based theory emerged in multiple places independently. Although none of these sources are connected, and none offer verifiable detail, they contain overlapping narrative elements, a truck, an unintentional impact, and a subsequent action taken to relocate the child or conceal the event. In various livestream discussions, references were made to Candus's statements about the truck itself. Some viewers recalled her describing moments where someone tripped by the truck, or mentioning confusion around movements near the vehicle while she was drinking. The phrasing was inconsistent and often attributed to times when she appeared intoxicated on camera. The lack of clarity in these statements made them susceptible to reinterpretation by the audience. In true crime analysis, ambiguous language from a primary individual often becomes the catalyst for rumor formation. Here, the same effect is visible. Fragments of unclear statements became integrated into the pre-existing vehicle-based narrative. When examining these claims collectively, the pattern becomes more structurally significant than any single detail. The Arkansas email describes a backing movement resulting in contact. The caller presents Candus describing Summer's position relative to the truck. The older rumor indicates an impact followed by movement of the child. None of the accounts share a common origin, yet each depicts a similar mechanism: a vehicle, a child behind or beside it, and an adverse outcome. The repetition of this mechanism across independent rumor chains is what gives the theory its persistent presence despite the absence of evidence. However, the lack of physical proof remains absolute. There are no documented injuries from a vehicle. No forensic examination of a truck has ever been released publicly. No witness independent of the rumor chain has stated that they saw a collision. No skid marks, drag marks, or traces consistent with a backing incident were noted in any official communication. Additionally, no immediate noise, disturbance, or vehicle movement was reported by neighbors that would align with such an incident. The complete absence of tangible indicators restricts the theory to the realm of speculation. Equally important is the absence of third-party witness testimony. The Arkansas email came from a woman who was not present and whose information source was unnamed. The caller who referenced Candus's phrase was repeating what they claimed to have heard. The early rumor provided no attributed source whatsoever. In investigations, the reliability of a claim declines significantly when it originates from a chain of retellings rather than direct observation. Each layer of hearsay increases the probability of misinterpretation. In this case, all available accounts are at least 2 layers removed from any verifiable event. One notable anomaly is that the earliest rumor, Summer was hit and moved, appears to predate both the Arkansas email and the caller's recounting of Candus's words. This chronological detail raises the question of whether later sources were influenced by earlier discussion, or whether multiple people independently formed similar assumptions based on limited information. When an event is poorly understood and the available facts contain gaps, the public often constructs explanations that fill those gaps using familiar mechanisms. Vehicle accidents are common and easily imagined. This makes them a recurring structure in community speculation, especially when a child's disappearance involves unclear movement patterns. The longevity of the vehicle-involved theory can therefore be attributed to two factors. First, it provides a simple explanation for a complex set of circumstances. Second, it is reinforced by overlapping rumor fragments that appear to corroborate one another while actually lacking independent origins. The repeated appearance of similar claims does not increase their evidentiary weight, but it does increase their psychological plausibility to those following the case. In communities where official information is scarce, rumor repetition often substitutes for verification. Within true crime analysis, maintaining accuracy requires separating recurrence from reliability. A claim repeated many times across independent discussions may appear credible because of its frequency, yet the underlying evidence has not changed. In the case of the vehicle-based theory, every component, positioning behind the truck, a low-speed impact, subsequent movement, remains unverified. None of the accounts meet the threshold for confirmation. The theory is therefore classified strictly as rumor, unverified, and alleged, regardless of how persistently it circulates. In the earliest version of events given by Candus, Grandis was present at the swimming hole with her, Hunter, and Summer. This placed her at a key location during the final verified hours before Summer was last seen. In that account, Grandis accompanied them during the outing, sat with Summer under the canopy, and was part of the group returning toward Ben Hill Road. Her presence at the lake is the only portion of the day where her position is clearly defined. From that point forward, the timeline begins to fracture, and Grandis gradually disappears from the narrative. The first major gap appears during the stop at Hunter's house. Multiple retellings of that visit, including descriptions from Hunter and callers recounting Candus's statements, fail to mention Grandis being present. If she left the lake in the same vehicle, there should be consistency in her placement throughout the next phase of the route. Instead, every account of the Hunter stop, whether referencing conversations on the porch, the brief exchange inside the home, or the moments leading up to the trip to Walgreens, omits her entirely. This omission occurs across narratives from different sources. None of them describe seeing Grandis during this segment. The absence is notable because other individuals at the house were accounted for: Hunter, Ollie, Candus, Summer. Conversations, behavior, and movements among those present were described in detail. Yet Grandis, who should have been visible, and who should have had some interaction with the group, is missing from every independent recounting. For an adult who was allegedly in the same vehicle moments earlier, the complete disappearance from this part of the timeline introduces an anomaly that cannot be overlooked. When Candus later explained why she returned home, she said she needed to help Grandis with her knee brace. This statement reintroduces Grandis back into the timeline after a significant gap. The phrasing implies Grandis was already at the Wells property before Candus arrived with Summer. The logical outcome is that she would have needed to be dropped off before Candus completed the other errands. Yet no narrative explicitly describes Candus dropping Grandis at the house. If Candus did not mention such a stop, the only alternative is that Grandis left the group earlier, but there is no account of her departure. This creates a structural contradiction. If she was with them at the lake, and if she needed help at home, the path she took from point A to point B is unaccounted for. Additionally, no independent witness places Grandis at the Wells property during the critical window. The time between leaving Hunter's house and Candus returning home forms one of the most disputed segments of the day. Whether that window contained a long drive, a brief stop, or unrecorded activity, no third party can confirm where Grandis was or what she was doing. Her role as the only other adult said to have been with Summer during the final confirmed hours makes her absence more conspicuous. If she truly was at the property awaiting assistance for her knee brace, no neighbor, passerby, or secondary observer has ever corroborated that fact. Her status as a silent witness compounds the problem. As someone who was part of the day's earlier activities, she should be able to offer a first-hand account of Summer's behavior, the condition of the group at the lake, and the transition from the outing to the return trip. Yet TBI has never released a timeline structured directly from her statements. Unlike the versions provided through interviews, press clips, or third-party retellings from other participants, Grandis's narrative has never been made public in any form. This absence removes one of the most potentially valuable sources of first-hand sequencing. Because she is neither publicly confirmed nor publicly ruled out during the most critical hours, Grandis occupies a unique position. She is both central and missing. She was close enough to observe events earlier in the day, but unaccounted for during the hours when the timeline begins to break apart. In cases with uncertain movement patterns, missing individuals often indicate gaps rather than irrelevance. Her disappearance from the narrative at exactly the time the timeline becomes unstable makes her absence more significant than her presence earlier in the day. The size of this gap is also important. If the time between the lake and the return home were consistent across accounts, her absence might be explainable as simple oversight. However, those time estimates vary widely. Some accounts imply a short trip with minimal stops. Others imply longer sequences with unexpected detours. Without knowing where Grandis was during those inconsistencies, it becomes impossible to reconstruct a coherent timeline. Her untracked position intersects directly with the period where documented facts decline and contradictions rise. Despite this, TBI has never released a statement clarifying her movements, correcting inconsistencies, or addressing gaps. In missing child investigations, confirmations or clarifications from secondary adults are often made public to reduce uncertainty. Here, no such clarity exists. Whether this silence reflects incomplete data, investigative necessity, or lack of relevance cannot be determined. What can be confirmed is that the absence of publicly acknowledged information about Grandis's timeline leaves a structural void in the reconstruction of events. This void has implications for analysis. The timeline cannot be fully assessed without understanding whether she traveled with Candus after the lake, whether she was dropped off, or whether she remained at the property for reasons unrelated to the events that followed. Each possibility carries different implications for the sequencing of the day. Each raises separate questions about who was present during key movements. In the absence of answers, her position remains a critical but undefined component of the case. Clothing is often one of the most stable anchors in a forensic timeline. It establishes visibility, confirms last sightings, and allows investigators to connect witness statements to specific moments. In the case of Summer Wells, however, even this basic anchor is compromised by inconsistencies. The most direct challenge to the accepted narrative comes from a caller who stated that the tracksuit stored in the memorial box was not the outfit Summer wore on the day she disappeared. This claim contradicts both public assumptions and portions of Candus's early descriptions. The caller did not present photographs or documentation, but the assertion immediately introduces doubt into an area where clarity is essential. Candus posted a photograph shortly after Summer's disappearance showing the child in a dark, long-sleeved tracksuit. Many assumed this was the outfit she wore when last seen. However, the timing of that photo and its context were never formally established. No official statement confirmed whether the picture was taken the same day or earlier. Despite this ambiguity, the image circulated widely, shaping public perception of her final appearance. The problem arises because Candus's own descriptions do not consistently support the tracksuit as the final outfit. In some versions, she described Summer wearing different items earlier in the day or changing clothes after the swimming trip. These variations produce uncertainty about when the tracksuit photo was taken and whether it reflects the final known moment. No independent witness has ever confirmed Summer's clothing at the time she was last seen. Hunter did not describe the tracksuit. Neighbors did not see her that afternoon. No verified sighting places her in any specific outfit after leaving the swimming hole. This absence matters because clothing should be one of the easiest details for secondary sources to corroborate. When multiple individuals are present during an outing, their recollections typically align on visible features such as color and style of garments. Here, however, every external description is either missing or inconsistent, leaving only Candus's shifting account and the disputed tracksuit in the memorial box. The issue becomes more complex when considering the timeline immediately after the swimming trip. According to Candus, Summer changed clothes at some point between leaving the lake and returning home. This statement introduces a time-dependent variable. If the child was wet and needed to change into a new outfit, the timing of that change must fit logically into the sequence of movements that followed. But the time window available has never been clearly defined, and Candus's retellings do not match consistently. Without a fixed sequence, the clothing change becomes another point of uncertainty, affecting how the timeline is reconstructed. In forensic analysis, clothing transitions are highly significant. They help determine when photographs were taken, whether a child was active or distressed, and whether an event occurred before or after a documented sighting. When an outfit is undisputed, investigators can map witness statements against it. When it is contested, the timeline becomes unstable. If Summer changed clothes after the swimming hole, investigators would need to know who witnessed the change, where it occurred, and what the final outfit looked like. None of these elements are supported by corroborated accounts. This lack of clarity undermines the credibility of any timeline that depends on clothing as a chronological marker. Another question arises regarding the absence of public investigative inquiry into the clothing discrepancies. TBI never issued a clarification about the outfit Summer was last seen wearing. No official description of a final outfit was released. In cases involving missing children, law enforcement typically publicizes such details to assist with public recognition and search coordination. The omission here may suggest that investigators have a definitive internal record, but chose not to release it, or it may indicate inconsistencies in witness accounts that prevented a clear determination. Either interpretation highlights the fragility of the clothing narrative. To compare the conflicting information clearly, three sources must be considered. First, Candus's statements. She described clothing changes, but did not provide a consistent timeline for when they occurred or what the final outfit was. Second, photographic evidence. The tracksuit photo exists, but its timestamp and relevance remain unverified. Third, caller accounts. Individuals who engaged with the case claim the tracksuit in the memorial box is not the outfit from the day Summer disappeared. Each of these sources contradicts or undermines the others, producing an unresolved question about something that should have been simple. The fact that this inconsistency has persisted for 3 years indicates how easily a key detail can be overshadowed. Clothing has been treated as an irrelevant point by much of the community, labeled a minor detail, or dismissed entirely. In forensic reconstruction, however, it is not minor. It is foundational. If the tracksuit was not the final outfit, any timeline built around the assumption that it was becomes unreliable. The uncertainty also leaves open the possibility that multiple photos taken on different days were mistakenly or deliberately interchanged in the early stages of public communication. The role of the tracksuit extends beyond identifying the final outfit. It also determines the last confirmed time Summer was seen alive. If Candus posted the tracksuit photo earlier or later than believed, or if it was taken on a different day entirely, the last seen visual reference shifts. This affects the credibility of any sequence that connects the swimming hole to the return home. It influences assumptions about Summer's condition, appearance, and behavior in the hours before she vanished. If the clothing was changed after the swimming outing and the final outfit was concealed, altered, or misrepresented, the forensic implications would be substantial. It would suggest that the timeline may have been controlled, or that certain events occurred in a window where clothing became a sensitive detail. In forensic contexts, intentional changes to a victim's outfit, whether to remove evidence, conceal injury, or alter the appearance of timelines, are considered significant. Even without evidence of deliberate action, The mere absence of clarity in this case elevates the importance of the clothing question. The Hill family appears repeatedly across calls, community discussions, and informal accounts connected to the Summer Wells case. Names such as Paul Hill, Randy Hill, and Fred Hill surface in different contexts, often without direct linkage, but with enough frequency to form a recognizable cluster. Their relevance does not come from any confirmed involvement in the disappearance. Rather, it stems from the repeated overlap between their locations, their known histories, and the movements of individuals within Summer's immediate environment. In unsolved cases, patterns of geographical and social proximity can become points of interest when official information is limited and the public attempts to reconstruct missing sequences. The first recurring element is the reference to Don Wells being arrested for DUI near the residence of Paul Hill. This detail appears consistently in caller discussions. The event itself is documented, but the significance lies not in the arrest, but in where it occurred. The location places Don in the vicinity of a property associated with one of the Hills, reinforcing the idea that his movements crossed paths with members of that family. Although a DUI stop does not suggest wrongdoing related to Summer, it confirms geographic intersection. When multiple names from the same area continue to appear across different narratives, those points of intersection become structurally relevant for mapping the social environment. Another reference linking the Hills to the Wells family's orbit comes from a statement that Allie's friend is also a Hill. This connection is not presented as evidence, but rather as further indication that the Hill surname is embedded throughout the local relationship network. Whether through friendship, neighborhood proximity, or shared social circles, each additional mention broadens the cluster. It reinforces the caller's remark, "Lots of Hills in them hills." The phrase captures a simple geographic truth. The surname is common in that region, and it also describes how the narrative repeatedly circles back to members of that extended family. One layer of rumor attempts to connect the Hills, Dawn, Candus, and Andy B. through alleged involvement in local banned substances activity. This allegation is unverified, and no official information supports it. However, the rumor persists because it aligns with community perceptions about behavior patterns in the area. Andy B.'s rumored involvement in banned substances distribution, Dawn and Candus's acknowledged history with substance use, and the geographic proximity of the Hill properties create a framework in which callers draw associative lines. From an investigative standpoint, these associations remain speculative. The presence of multiple individuals with substance-related histories in a small rural region does not establish conspiracy. But in terms of narrative structure, the repeated appearance of the Hill surname alongside Dawn and Candus forms a cluster that public analysts continue to revisit. Fred Hill's name appears in this context as well. According to Dolly, Fred was never cleared in any formal public capacity. This does not mean he was a suspect. It simply means no public announcement addressed his status in the investigation. In high-profile cases, when individuals are not explicitly ruled out, their names remain points of speculation regardless of actual relevance. In this case, the lack of a public statement allowed Fred Hill to remain in circulation within rumor discussions, reinforcing his inclusion in the broader cluster even though no evidence connects him directly to the disappearance. Geographically, the Hill family forms a small but dense constellation near Ben Hill Road. Properties referenced in calls place various Hill residences within short driving distance of the Wells property. Without precise mapping, the exact distances remain unclear, but the aggregate pattern suggests a localized network of homes scattered along connected roads. In true crime analysis, proximity alone does not imply involvement, but it does identify an area that is socially intertwined. This geographic interconnectedness explains why the Hill surname continues to appear when callers describe who lives near whom, who knows whom, and who may have crossed paths with the Wells family. Considering a hypothetical map, if one were to place pins for each location associated with Dawn's movements, the Wells property, Andy B.'s rumored residence, and the various Hill households, the result would be a cluster concentrated within a relatively tight radius. This geometry does not confirm criminal activity, but it illustrates how social networks in rural regions naturally overlap. Individuals interact at local stores, shared driveways, and common routes. This proximity means that names repeat not because of coordinated action, but because the landscape itself is small. The reason this cluster appears so frequently in rumors is rooted in the absence of public investigative detail. When official sources provide minimal information, community members fill the gaps using recognizable names. The hills are recognizable. They live nearby. They have history in the area. Their names appear in police reports unrelated to the Wells case. And in rural communities, a well-known surname becomes a focal point, even when there is no confirmed connection to the underlying event. As each new rumor emerges, the same names reappear, not because they are implicated, but because they occupy stable social positions within a shared environment. This creates a feedback loop. The more often the Hill surname is mentioned, the more relevant it seems, even without evidence. Each reference reinforces the perception of a network, and each overlap between the Hills, Don, or Andy B strengthens the perceived significance of that network. Yet none of these overlaps meet investigative thresholds. They remain points of interest only because they recur, not because they substantively connect. The sequence of events surrounding Ziggy introduced a volume of unrelated material into the public discussion, drawing a significant portion of the true crime community into analysis that had no direct connection to the Summer Wells investigation. Her claims, live streams, and perceived threats became the center of attention for weeks, redirecting conversations away from unresolved contradictions in the core case. In true crime ecosystems, this type of diversion is common. A single dramatic incident can overshadow long-standing inconsistencies, replacing substantive analysis with speculation driven by personality-driven narratives. The Ziggy situation exemplifies how rapidly the investigative focus can fracture when new drama enters the environment. As the community concentrated on her pacing, her statements, and the debates surrounding her credibility, several critical pieces of information were pushed out of focus. The alleged message containing the phrase, "It was done," slipped deeper into rumor territory as viewers spent more time discussing Ziggy's live streams than interrogating the implications of that statement. The unexplained disappearance of Candus from the timeline, which once served as one of the most significant gaps in reconstructing the day's events, became a background detail rather than a priority for scrutiny. The recurring claims that Summer had been behind the truck, along with the alternative scenario that placed her in proximity to a backing vehicle, were rarely revisited while the community focused on Ziggy's personal movements. Even the dispute surrounding Summer's final outfit, once recognized as a key forensic detail, lost traction amid the influx of new noise. This shift illustrates how drama creates what investigators refer to as information noise, data of low evidentiary value that occupies disproportionate cognitive space within the audience. Livestream formats amplify this effect because they deliver information in real time, blending factual statements with speculation and interpretation before the audience can distinguish among them. As creators respond to one another, each commentary generates additional layers of interpretation, expanding the noise without adding clarity. The process transforms isolated remarks into perceived patterns, even when those patterns have no foundation beyond repetition. YouTube's architecture plays a direct role in this distortion. The platform rewards engagement, comments, views, shares, regardless of accuracy. As controversy increases interaction, the algorithm promotes content that generates the strongest reactions, elevating dramatic claims over methodical analysis. In this environment, creators become incentivized to respond quickly rather than verify information. The need to maintain audience interest can override the slower, less marketable process of evaluating inconsistencies, comparing accounts, or revisiting unresolved details. Over time, the drama becomes the central narrative, while the underlying case becomes a backdrop. As rumors multiply, the boundary between fact, speculation, and hearsay becomes blurred. Viewers encountering fragmented clips or secondhand quotes often cannot determine which statements come from official sources and which originate from rumor chains. The lack of established verification standards within the community compounds the problem. A repeated claim appears credible simply because of its frequency, not because of its evidentiary grounding. Information that should be interrogated becomes accepted, while information that should be prioritized becomes neglected. Creators themselves are often drawn into the narrative structures they help construct. As they respond to one another's interpretations, their focus can shift from the underlying case to the interpersonal dynamics surrounding it. Arguments about credibility, accusations of misinformation, and speculation about motives become dominant topics. This creates a recursive loop. Content about the drama generates more drama, which generates more content. The original investigative questions recede as personality conflicts take center stage. In this context, the meaningful data points in the Summerwells case require deliberate extraction. Several contradictions remain relevant regardless of the surrounding noise. The alleged message, "It was done," though unverified, carries linguistic weight and should be examined within the timeline rather than dismissed. The absence of Candus during the most critical hours remains one of the timeline's largest gaps and continues to influence any reconstruction of the day's events. The statements suggesting Summer was near or behind the truck, combined with the pre-existing rumor structures, represent a pattern that warrants analysis disconnected from community interpretation. The clothing discrepancy undermines the final visual anchor of the timeline and must be resolved before any accurate reconstruction can occur. To conduct a meaningful analysis, a clear separation must be maintained between noise and signal. Noise consists of personality-driven content, speculative commentary, and drama that does not produce verifiable data. Signal consists of inconsistencies that persist across accounts, contradictions that cannot be reconciled, and structural gaps that directly affect the timeline. Focusing on the signal requires intentionally disregarding the dramatic elements that dominate online discussions. It demands the identification of factual anchors and the reconstruction of sequences based solely on those anchors. The importance of distinguishing between these categories extends beyond analytic clarity. When noise overtakes signal, public understanding of the case becomes distorted, and the potential for meaningful insight diminishes. Investigative attention shifts toward distractions, while critical details remain unaddressed. In the case of Summerwells, 3 contradictions persist at the core: the unverified but consequential message attributed to Candus, the disappearance of Candus from the timeline during the most important hours, and the inconsistent accounts surrounding Summer's final outfit and position relative to the household routine. These 3 elements continue to influence any plausible reconstruction, and any serious examination of the case must prioritize them over the surrounding chatter.